Back in 2021, we had the revelation of emails from the German Interior Ministry that enlisted scientists to scare the population. Last year, it was revealed that the corona figures had been falsified by Dutch Health Minister Hugo de Jonge by inflating the numbers. And now we have the revelation of over 100,000 WhatsApp messages from former British Health Minister Matt Hancock. The British daily, The Telegraph, has put them online as the lockdown files. From all these revelations, it has been shown time and again that the coronavirus was no more deadly than other cold and flu viruses. As we know from flu and colds, these can be fatal to vulnerable, very old people. But for anyone under 80, these viruses are almost never fatal. And so it was with COVID-19. It was a common cold virus. Minister Matt Hancock had a discussion with then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, via WhatsApp about this low mortality rate. This was a problem because it meant vaccination targets would not be met. The lockdown files also show that in addition to the vaccines, other corona measures were mainly intended to instill fear of the virus in the population. The revelations in Germany, the Netherlands and now especially in the United Kingdom show that the same corona policy was deliberately followed in all these countries, which had nothing to do with the nature of the coronavirus itself. The lockdown files show that no special measures were needed given the low mortality of the virus. The British government switched from publishing mortality rates to publishing the number of infections. The entire EU then switched and reported on corona in the same way. Pushing through the vaccines and introducing the corresponding digital corona certificate was the real goal. For this, no means were shunned. Unvaccinated people were not simply portrayed as irresponsible, but as antisocial, dangerous enemies of the state. There were threats of incarceration and forced vaccination. Unvaccinated people were fired. People were locked in their homes via curfews. Hospitals and nursing homes prohibited partners and children from visiting their sick spouse or parents even when they were dying. From the beginning, there were medical experts who scientifically argued the futility of the imposed measures and warned against the vaccinations. Doctors who protested were silenced on social media. Doctors who prescribed effective drugs were punished with heavy fines and revocation of their registration. The lockdown files show that the unvaccinated and critical doctors were right, that there was absolutely nothing right about the government policy. What also emerges from the lockdown files is the involvement of Bill Gates. Matt Hancock literally apps about Bill Gates. He owes me one. In other words, Bill Gates owed him one because Hancock had millions of his vaccines injected. This so-called philanthropist bought shares in Big Pharma for $50 million, and after the corona hype, they were sold for $500 million. The contracts with huge sums of money signed by governments with the pharmaceutical multinationals are still not public. The correspondence between Pfizer and the EU President Ursula von der Leyen is still secret. The messages between Dutch Minister Hugo de Jonge and Prime Minister Mark Rutte about corona have supposedly been erased. It looks like the European Commission and governments of EU member states were as aware of corona's low mortality as the British government. Their policies are almost identical. The flawed PCR test was accepted EU-wide. The digital corona certificate became an international travel document. And even the wording is almost identical. several countries at the same time were talking about vaccinating from neighborhood to neighborhood, from house to house, from arm to arm. The measures lacked any reasonable ground, yet violated basic human rights, fundamental freedoms. Physical and mental integrity were violated without justification. There must be government accountability for this in every state. As a member of the European Parliament, I demand that the European Commission come to the Parliament to account for this. Therefore, I ask the President of the European Parliament to urgently put on the agenda for the next Strasbourg session a debate on the lockdown files with Ursula von der Leyen. We will see whether the European Parliament wants to take up its controlling task or whether it's complicit in the biggest scandal of the century.